Christina. Hi, everybody. I'm Shirley. I'm one of the housing attorneys at Legal Aid Society of San Mateo County. I work with a team of folks, legal professionals, who are dedicated to helping low-income tenants in the county for free, with the primary objective that we keep y'all in your home. I do have a few slides, and I don't know if it's possible for IT to put those up on the Zoom. Not seeing them. So I will start with a little bit of a preamble that there's a lot happening legally with eviction defense right now. You probably are seeing a lot in the news about federal action, the state bill that's pending as we speak. I believe it just passed the Senate and the legislature's sitting on it right now. We'll see if it passes tonight. And that looks like the last slide, so we're gonna go all the way to the beginning. There you go, you got it. And so I'm not going to get into the weeds of what each and every law that's relevant to South San Francisco tenants are, because that's a long presentation and not what you signed up for today. But I really do want to focus on, based on the laws that do apply, what it is that tenants who are in financial distress right now can do now to sort of shore up their rights and maximize the chances of their tenancy being sustained. So in the next slide, this is just to reinforce that there are sort of an abundance of laws that are relevant and at work right now, all of which are supposed to work together and overlay to help you stay in your home. Just at a high level, the state law that everybody's reading about in the news right now is now AB 3088. That's a rebranding of what you might have read about as AB 1436. This is the compromise bill that Governor Newsom was involved in negotiating, and that is pending, as I said, as we speak, but by midnight tonight, we'll know if it becomes law. And sort of at a high level, this is ultimately targeted at making rent debt that tenants could be evicted for not paying into civil debt, meaning it's money that the tenant still owes, but wouldn't be evicted as a consequence of failing to pay. And so it covers a certain period of time that actually is pretty parallel with what our local San Mateo County ordinance covers. And if that does become law, then we're going to have to have a little bit of a learning curve as we see how it relates and overlays with our local law. But that would be a state law that covers the whole state, so the whole county and everyone in South San Francisco equally, and mostly relates to non-payment of rent evictions. We have locally in our county also two things in play. Our local court, the Superior Court, and the presiding judge of our Superior Court has issued an order that court proceedings are not going to move forward for at least the next month. And so that is a hold on the eviction court proceedings that results in tenants getting locked out. That's on hold right now based on a local order. And then our San Mateo County eviction moratorium, which is technically Emergency Rule 2020-01. That's what creates a right for tenants to have more time to pay rent debt that's accruing during this pandemic. And as our city manager referenced, the end of that period where rent debt's going to be covered by the San Mateo County eviction moratorium is ending today, actually, but there's still a forward-looking right to pay over a more extended period of time. And then we have a federal law also that's going to give some tenants more time who are covered by the federal eviction moratorium, and that's giving tenants sort of a longer time frame in which to pay before evictions can move forward, extending what would normally be a 3-day notice to a 30-day notice. So as you can see, there's this whole assembly of things all working together to try to help tenants stay in their home. And so let's talk a little bit about what tenants can actually do to make sure that these laws work for them as intended. So on the next slide, The biggest thing that I want to reinforce here, and if you remember nothing else from what I say today, is that tenants are generally entitled to due process. That means no matter how much rent you owe, no matter where you live, even if it's a room in a house, no matter how angry your landlord is about what's going on, you're entitled to written notice from that landlord and a legal procedure in court before you can be forced to leave. We're seeing a lot of illegal eviction activity happening right now, I think just because people are getting scared and desperate. And many people who don't understand that they have the legal right to due process and a legal procedure think that they have to leave because they owe too much money. And that's something that is just important to know in the community, and make sure your friends and neighbors are aware of, that these laws don't work if you get scared into leaving without availing yourself of your rights. So don't be frightened into moving, always ask questions, and make sure that if your landlord is doing something really illegal, like changing your locks, shutting off your utilities, packing your stuff up and putting it out on the curb, know that that's illegal, and know that you have the backing of legal folks at Legal Aid Society, and you can call the police for intervention on that. On the next slide, the most constructive thing you can do is communicate with your landlord. Notifying your landlord if you're not going to be able to pay your rent is a great opportunity for y'all to work together with the programs that were previously mentioned, trying to cooperatively apply for rental assistance through the tenant assistance program, where landlords oftentimes have to provide some documentation to help with that. Or the tenants can even be supportive of the landlord applying for the default prevention assistance. If the tenant and their neighbors are, lots of them, behind on some rent, the tenants can help provide documentation for the landlord to get assistance. So if there's going to be an income shortfall, don't let that be a surprise to your landlord. Make sure you're communicating it, and also don't commit to particular payment plans without getting that looked over by a legal services lawyer or somebody who can give you competent legal advice. A lot of the laws that I mentioned give you a certain amount of time to pay a certain amount of money, and you wouldn't want to enter into a repayment agreement that conflicted with the law. So just making sure everybody's rights are covered and that you're agreeing to something that's consistent with the law. Don't sign things that you haven't had looked at. On the next slide, communicating with your landlord verbally is fine, especially if you're working together, but to protect your legal rights, you should also communicate in writing. So again, even if you've told the landlord, hey, I lost my job, I'm going to be late on rent, it's going to take a while before I can pay it back, also put that in writing. Under both our local San Mateo County eviction moratorium and the pending state bill, in both instances, you have to document in writing with a written statement that you have COVID-related income shortfall or increased expenses, some type of economic impact on your household related to COVID. And it doesn't have to necessarily be that you got sick. It can be an indirect sort of relationship, like you had to stay home with kids who were out of school, or you had increased expenses, related to having to shelter in place. Anything related to COVID can be an economic impact that justifies delayed rent payments or conversion to civil debt. So putting that in writing is important. Under our local moratorium, you're also supposed to provide documentation of that impact. If putting it in writing is a little bit tricky for you, you have a useful template available at the Legal Aid website. We have a COVID page with some template letters in English and Spanish. So check out our website if you need some help writing that letter. Also, keep a copy of whatever you send. Under our local moratorium, you can send a written document, by mail or however you would normally submit your rent. But if you also communicate with your landlord by text or by email normally, you can also send texts and emails. But keep a copy no matter how you send it. Next slide. So as we've referenced a couple times here, there's a particular period under our local moratorium that ends today. That doesn't mean that there's no more protections under our moratorium. What it means is that the period of time available for delayed rent payments it really only goes from April through August. Those 5 months are a special period of time where if you accrued rent debt during that time, you now have more time to pay it off. Over the next 12 months, up through August 31st of 2021, you can make payments gradually over time. Up to half of the total rent debt accrued over these past 5 months would need to be paid within 6 months, and then the other half can be paid off in another 6 months. So this is giving people sort of this gradual payment plan to get caught up without being in default, which is just the legal term we would call being so behind in rent that you're subject to eviction. So our moratorium doesn't stop protecting you, but new rent isn't going to come under the cover of that protection after today. Next slide. So what that means is that rent that comes due tomorrow after that protection period is over, that's not rent that you have more time to pay. So prioritizing the current months of rent that come due after today is the first and most important strategy after notifying your landlord that you're going to be late. Start paying what you can as soon as you can for the current month of rent. So if you have some money and you're trying to decide what's most important to pay first, the answer is September. Pay September's rent first, because if you didn't pay September on time, you could get an eviction notice just for being late on September right away. April, May, June, July, and August, you shouldn't be getting an eviction notice for that yet because you have this delayed payment right to pay that over a long period of time. But that's not true anymore for September. So September's rent is going to be most important. October's rent is going to be pretty important too. Under the state law, there's going to be some cover for rent past September and October. But right now, the most important thing is to prioritize September and October. So if you're applying for rental assistance with any of the core service agencies, they're going to also know to prioritize September's rent. Documenting that that's what you're paying by making it clear with your landlord. You write it on your check on the memo line. You write it on your money order. You put a letter in with your payment. We have a template for that on the same website if you want to have a letter to enclose with your rent payment. That's a good way to make sure that your landlord knows how to apply that payment, because otherwise they might think, oh, I'm going to put this to April, which again is not the most urgent rent to be paying right now. Next slide. So a lot of these laws are confusing in how they work together. A lot of us in the legal advocacy arena are still figuring out a little bit how the new state laws are going to interact with our local laws. Don't try to figure it out on your own. Don't try to figure it out on Google. Ask the questions of the people who know. And you can get free legal help by calling us at Legal Aid. The number here, 517-8911, is our hotline specifically for housing issues. So if you call that number, you're going to get one of our housing team who should be able to answer your question. And if you need a legal consultation about an eviction notice, any legal papers you've received, or anything that your landlord's doing that seems like it's not consistent with these laws, then we're going to get you hooked up with a lawyer for a free consultation. You can also check out the resources on our COVID-19 page. We have an explainer video about the eviction moratorium, and as I said, some letter templates and some FAQs about the eviction moratorium. We'll have some new things up after today, assuming that the state bill becomes law, because a lot of questions are going to come up about whether the rent that you owe is something that you can be evicted for paying, for not paying. So civil debt conversion is going to be sort of the next thing that we're figuring out as a community and how that interacts with our eviction moratorium. So stay posted on that. And with that, I think that's everything I've got to present.